あれひょっとしてお化けとかダメなの？
だって見えないとか触れないとか卑怯じゃん。何かあっても殴れないし。
Hey everybody, welcome to another lesson of learning Japanese. We are doing another anime line of the day, and the reference series that we are going to be using today is the 9th episode of the anime series Sansha Sanyou, otherwise known as Three Leaves, Three Colors. And so the line that we're going to cover today, kind of paraphrased and made more general, is "It's not fair if I can't punch it if anything happens." And so with the line introduced, we are now going to go to the actual episode, the scene that the line's used in, so we can hear the original Japanese. So here it is.
あれひょっとしてお化けとかダメなの？
だって見えないとか触れないとか卑怯じゃん。何かあっても殴れないし。
And so there you go. It's a bit longer than our usual anime lines of the day because it's not really just one line. We had to provide the one before it as well to give a little context to the conversation. So let's take a look at that one. It's just going to be the line, あれひょっとしてお化けとかダメなの? And this is going to translate to, oh, could it be that you're scared of things like ghosts? And so what we're going to do, or rather what we're not going to do, is kind of break down this initial sentence. We're just going to need to know what it means translated, basically, to give us the context to the situation. So this character's line right here is effectively establishing the topic of this conversation of being about basically ghosts or monsters. So she's asking the person, could it be that you're scared of ghosts? And so the other character's line is going to be the one that we're going to break down in this segment here. And so what she says is, Datte, mienai toka, sawarenai toka hikyou jyan. Nanika attemo nagurenai shi.
だって見えないとか触れないとか卑怯じゃん。何かあっても殴れないし。
So what she's saying here, what that's going to translate to is something along the lines of, I mean, think about it. It's not fair that you can't see or touch them or anything. That means I can't punch them if anything happens. And so what we'll do now is we're going to take this line of hers, and of course, as always, we're going to break it down to see how everything's working here. So first up, we have the word datte. So datte is a phrase that is kind of hard to translate because depending on the context, it can mean a very large number of things. It's a conversational word that kind of just is used to explain yourself. Sometimes it can translate to because, other times it can be but, other times it can be after all. Here, we're going to go for a more casual version of that kind of nuance and just say, I mean, think about it. Moving on, we have the appearance of a more formal word, and that is just going to be the word mienai, which is going to be the negative nai form of the verb mieru, which means to be able to see. Right after mienai, we have the particle toka. Toka is essentially a grammar pattern in and of itself. What it's going to mean is basically among other things or such as. We use it after the plain form of verbs to kind of give that idea of and such, or things like that. So I'll explain that a little bit more after we move on a bit, because toka is actually going to appear one more time in the sentence for the sake of consistency. So right after the first toka, we see that there is another verb in its negative nai form, and that is going to be the verb sawaru, which means to touch or to feel. Before it's changed into its negative nai form, it's actually going to be changed into its potential form, just like mieru. So sawaru is going to be changed to sawareru. Then the final ru at the end of it is going to be changed to nai because we're going to change it to the negative form. So the negative potential form of to touch is going to be to not be able to touch. And like I just said, toka is going to appear after this again because it's being used kind of like a chain reaction here. It's going to be used after each of the negative potential verbs. And so then what we're going to do is we're going to look at that whole phrasing right there, mienai toka, sawarenai toka, and that is going to translate to something along the lines of can't see or can't touch or anything. And hopefully you can see how the or anything at the end of that phrasing is how we're going to translate the appearance of the grammar pattern toka, because it means things such as not being able to see, not being able to touch. To kind of naturalize that, we're going to do or anything. You can't see them or you can't touch them or anything. And now finishing up this first sentence in the line, we simply have the adjective hikyou, which is going to translate to cowardly or mean, or more appropriately for this sentence, unfair. Right after hikyou, we have the wording jyan, and this is going to be a conjugation of what we usually know as janai, which is basically just the negative form, and it's used at the end of the sentence to essentially seek affirmation, kind of. It's identical to the English usage of isn't it at the end of a sentence. And so here instead of janai, we have jan because the nai is just going to turn to the character n as a kind of regional conjugation there. And now let's take a look at the whole sentence again. Datte, mienai toka sawarenai toka hikyou jyan.
だって見えないとか触れないとか卑怯じゃん。
And so hopefully you can kind of note how the word datte, as we kind of explained earlier, can translate to because. There is a kind of sense of an explanation in the sentence as she says, mienai toka sawarenai toka. That's kind of going to be the reason you can't see them or touch them or anything. And then the adjective hikyou by itself is kind of the result of the because. So because you can't touch them or see them, it is unfair. Now let's move on to the second sentence in this line, and it's much more simpler. So first up, we just have nanika, and that is going to translate to basically something or anything. Then we have the phrasing attemo, and so nanika attemo is actually kind of a set phrase essentially. It's used widely in conversation, and it has some really natural translations such as no matter what or whatever may come. What it literally translates to here is basically nanika is going to translate to something. In this utterance of the phrase, we're kind of missing the particle ga as it's usually used in this phrase, nanika ga attemo. Here the particle ga is dropped just for the more casualness. But if the ga actually was included in this line, you might get a sense of how this is kind of the grammar pattern noun ga aru, which is basically the existential phrase for something to be. Then we have the aru conjugated into its te form plus the particle mo to kind of mean even if the verb occurs. And so what this would literally translate to is kind of even if there is something, kind of naturalize that more, even if anything happens. And that exact wording kind of is actually going to be our choice for the final translation, except that we drop the even because even if we don't have the word even, it kind of makes sense. And so what we end up with is just the phrasing, if anything happens for nanika attemo. This is admittedly still kind of a literal translation. If we wanted to fit a more naturalized line to the very context of the situation, we could go with alternative wording such as if they try anything fishy or if worse comes to worse, or something along those lines. And that one phrase is basically half of the sentence already, so now let's move on. And we have yet another verb in its negative nai form after it's been conjugated into its potential form, and that is going to be the verb naguru, which means to strike or to hit or to punch. We're going to go with punch. And so the potential form of that is going to be nagureru, and then we're going to change that in turn into its negative nai form, so nagurenai. And of course, that's going to translate to not be able to punch or can't punch. And to end the sentence, we have the particle shi, which is used after verbs to kind of have this nuance of explanation. And so then, nanika attemo nagurenai shi, what we're going to translate that to is that means I can't punch them if anything happens. Hopefully you can see how the first two words of our translation, that means, is going to be kind of the translation for the ending character she, because that has a nuance of explanation, but there isn't a kind of direct translation that we can use, so we go with that means to kind of portray that idea of I'm explaining something. And so yeah, let's take a look at the whole line with both sentences now. I mean, think about it. It's not fair that you can't see or touch them or anything. That means I can't punch them if anything happens. And here the them, of course, is referring to ghosts, which we wouldn't have known if we didn't provide the line spoken before this one to set the context. And with that, let's take one more listen at the Japanese of this.
あれひょっとしてお化けとかダメなの？
だって見えないとか触れないとか卑怯じゃん。何かあっても殴れないし。
And so there you go. Hopefully our character here has taught us some new grammar or some new words, as well as proving her very valid point about things being unfair if you just can't hit people, if anything happens, if worse comes to worse, or if they try anything fishy. And yeah. And so that's about going to cover it for this anime line of the day. And of course, once again, we have another subsequent line spoken in that scene in that anime episode in its original Japanese here for you to try to translate yourself, interpret yourself, and post your own translation in the comments. And with that, stay tuned for the next anime line of the day here on Learning Japanese.